Ken served him twice. The first time was around 4:30 in the afternoon. 2 rum and cokes. Brian Hooker paid by card, said very little, and went back to wherever his wife was by the pool. The bar was busy that Saturday. Ken moved on to the next person. The second time was approximately 90 minutes later. Brian came back for another round. The bar was even more crowded by then. There were people everywhere. The kind of Saturday evening at a Bahamian poolside bar that makes you move fast and thank the staff when they get to you without delay. Brian did exactly that. He looked at Ken and said something that Ken has now put on the record by name in the New York Post and on Fox News. "Oh, man. Thank you for getting me served kind of quick." We were crowded. Ken nodded. He poured the drinks. He moved to the next customer. That was the last interaction he documented with Brian Hooker before Lynette Hooker entered the water and did not come back. Ken is 38 years old. He is from the Bahamas. He has spent his life on and around the waters of Elbow Cay and the Sea of Abaco. He knows the geography of those islands the way you know the geography of the place you grew up in. He knows the distances. He knows what the water does in those conditions. He knows how long it takes a boat to get from one point to another on a crossing he has watched happen hundreds of times from behind that bar. And when Ken heard what Brian Hooker said happened in the hours after those last 2 rum and cokes were poured, something in that local geographic knowledge made him stop. This is Global Crime Files. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Onstead, Michigan, a small town about 70 miles southwest of Detroit, where she had built an ordinary life before she and Brian sold everything and went to sea. She was not someone who stumbled into sailing in retirement. She had been around boats and lakes since childhood. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, told the Associated Press directly, Lynette had been around lakes, boats, sailing, and swimming her entire life. Her daughter, Carly Aylesworth, told CBS News, "My mom is very fit and strong. She's a good swimmer. She can't just have fallen off the boat." For over a decade, Lynette and Brian document their life at sea under the name The Sailing Hookers. Sea turtles and sunsets. Cinnamon rolls baked in a solar oven on the deck of a 55-foot sailboat they named Soulmate. 2 people who had chosen the water over everything else. Lynette's last Instagram post was April 4th, 2026. The caption said, "Not going anywhere for a while." She had no idea. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, Lynette and Brian Hooker arrived at the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. Ken was behind the bar. He served them twice. He never actually saw Lynette during those 2.5 hours. She had gone to the pool when Brian ordered the first round. Brian came back 90 minutes later for the second. And then the evening continued, and Ken finished his shift and went home. And when he woke up the next morning and heard what had happened on the water the night before, something in him did not sit right. Subscribe to Global Crime Files and turn on your notifications before we continue. We examine documented evidence, source every claim, and name every expert. We do not speculate beyond what the public record supports. Now let us get into what Ken knows, what Jim Todd saw, and what a photograph taken at 6:34 p.m. reveals about the night Lynette Hooker disappeared. There is a photograph. Joe, a fisherman who was at the Abaco Inn on the evening of April 4th, was taking pictures of the environment for his mother. He had no connection to the Hookers, no reason to document them. He was photographing waves and atmosphere and the beauty of the Bahamian evening light. And without knowing it, he caught something in the background of one of those frames. The photograph is time-stamped 6:34 p.m. It shows Brian and Lynette Hooker at the pool of the Abaco Inn. Lynette is wearing what investigative journalist Ashley Banfield and others have confirmed is a light green bathing suit cover-up. Not a black two-piece bathing suit. A green cover-up, clearly visible, worn over whatever she had on underneath. 6:34 p.m. Then Carly Aylesworth, Lynette's daughter, and her boyfriend Steve reviewed surveillance footage from the Abaco Inn. Carly told Banfield what that footage showed. At approximately 6:38 p.m., Brian and Lynette Hooker were walking out of the Abaco Inn toward the dock, 4 minutes after the photograph was taken, heading for the dinghy. Heading for the water, Brian Hooker told Bahamian authorities they left at approximately 7:30 p.m. Stop. Hold those 3 times in your mind simultaneously. 6:34, the photograph. 6:38, the surveillance footage. 7:30, what Brian told police. The gap between 6:38 and 7:30 is 52 minutes. Not a few minutes of imprecise memory. Not the kind of discrepancy that comes from someone trying to remember whether they left at 7:10 or 7:20. 52 minutes. And that 52 minutes is not a detail that sits alone in this case. It connects directly to the center of Brian Hooker's account of why he could not see Lynette after she went into the water. Brian told authorities the conditions were rough, high winds, choppy seas, darkness falling fast. He said it was dark enough by the time Lynette went overboard that he lost sight of her. That darkness is the load-bearing element of the explanation for why a former United States Marine could not locate his wife in the water near him. Without the darkness, the story requires different answers. Jim Todd is a volunteer with the Hopetown Fire and Rescue Service. He is a solid citizen on a small island where everyone knows each other and everybody says so. He was one of the first people to encounter Brian Hooker on the morning of April 5th. He helped rescue Brian from the shore at Marsh Harbor. He went back out on the fire and rescue vessel with Brian and the police. He stood on the bow of that boat with Brian Hooker for approximately 10 minutes while Brian tried to point out where Lynette went overboard. Jim was also at a restaurant with his wife and family on the evening of April 4th. He arrived just before 7:30 p.m., and he has a specific memory of that evening, and he told Banfield exactly what he observed. At approximately 7:30 to 7:45 p.m., the wind had kicked up to the point where it was unpleasant. It was getting dark. He would not have expected to see boats underway in those conditions. It was rough enough that no boater should be out. But at 6:38, when the surveillance footage suggests Brian and Lynette were heading for the dock, Jim Todd confirmed something that cannot be argued with. In those waters, at that time of year, 6:38 p.m. on April 4th was not darkness. It was not dusk. It was daylight. Clear, full, unambiguous daylight. And it would remain daylight for another 45 minutes to an hour. Jim said it directly in his interview. At a 15-minute dinghy crossing from the Abaco Inn dock to where the Soulmate was anchored, an incident happening at approximately 6:50 to 6:55 p.m. would have happened in complete daylight. Now hold Ken's detail here, because Ken knows those waters too. 4 miles. That is the distance from where the alleged incident occurred near Elbow Cay to the Marsh Harbor boatyard where Brian arrived at approximately 4 a.m. on April 5th. Ken told Fox News, "It's only 4 miles that way. It shouldn't have taken 8 to 10 hours to get there. Even if he was only floating, it should have been a much quicker time. Ken is not a maritime authority. He is not a forensic analyst. He is a man from the Bahamas who has spent his life watching boats cross that water, and who knows what 4 miles looks like from a man in a small dinghy in those specific conditions. 8 to 10 hours for 4 miles. Ken called it weird. That is his word. Not accusatory, not investigative. Weird. The word of someone who knows the geography and does the arithmetic and finds that the numbers do not resolve the way they should. Brian Hooker has said publicly, in his first interview following his release, that he never harmed Lynette and never would harm Lynette, and that he wants to find her. His attorney, Terrell Butler, has stated categorically and unequivocally that Brian Hooker denies all wrongdoing. He has not been charged with any crime. The investigation remains active. Those facts are in the record, and they are stated here clearly and without qualification. But Ken did not see anything weird about Brian Hooker, the man. He described the interaction across his bar as ordinary. Brian seemed like a former soldier, quiet, polite, grateful for fast service. Nothing flagged. Nothing stood out. Ken is not describing a man who behaved suspiciously in the hours before his wife disappeared. He is describing a man who ordered rum and cokes and said, "Thank you," and left. What Ken is describing as weird is not the man. It is the math. And the math connects to something else that Jim Todd put on the record. Something that Ken's account makes more significant, not less. On the morning of April 5th, standing on the bow of the fire and rescue vessel with Brian Hooker, Jim Todd asked what Lynette was wearing when she went into the water. That question is not casual. In a search and rescue operation, the clothing description becomes the target. It goes into text messages. It goes to every team on the water. Every person scanning the surface for any floating material is looking for what the clothing description told them to look for. Brian Hooker's answer was consistent. Every time he was asked, from Jim Todd on the bow of the rescue boat to the search and rescue teams coordinating by text, a black two-piece bathing suit. That is what they were looking for. A woman in a black two-piece bathing suit. The photograph taken at 6:34 p.m. shows Lynette Hooker wearing a light green bathing suit cover-up, a green garment, on top of whatever she was wearing underneath. Visible, floating, searchable. The kind of thing that a search and rescue team with instructions to look for green would have prioritized in those waters. Brian never mentioned the green cover-up. Not to Jim Todd. Not to the search and rescue teams. Not in any statement that made its way into the text chains that were coordinating the search for his wife. Jim Todd told Banfield directly, when he found out about the green cover-up, it profoundly changed how he felt about Brian's story. His words, profoundly changed. Because a man who watched his wife go into the water 4 minutes after a photograph was taken of her wearing a green cover-up does not forget the green cover-up if he is trying to help people find her. The green cover-up is what he would have said first. The green cover-up is the most visible thing on her body if she is in the water. The green cover-up is the detail that search and rescue teams need. It was not mentioned. Not once. Not to Jim Todd. Not to the teams. Not in any account that has been publicly confirmed. Brian Hooker denies all wrongdoing. His attorney has stated that clearly. He has not been charged. The investigation is active, and the Royal Bahamas Police Force Commissioner confirmed to NBC News that Brian Hooker remains a named suspect who has not been cleared. Now let us come back to Ken, because Ken is the one who put the evening in context in a way that nobody else can. He was there. He was behind that bar. He watched that evening from the position of a man who serves people and studies them from a professional distance without intruding. Ken never saw Lynette Hooker directly during the 2.5 hours the couple was at the Abaco Inn. He saw Brian twice. He heard Brian's voice twice. He took Brian's card payment, and he heard Brian's gratitude for fast service. And what Ken told Fox News about why the subsequent events don't add up is not a theory. It is not speculation, dressed up as analysis. It is geographic knowledge applied to a specific set of numbers. It's only 4 miles that way. It shouldn't have taken 8 to 10 hours to get there. Even if he was only floating, it should have been a much quicker time. Ken knows the Sea of Abaco. He knows those crossings. He knows what the currents do and what the winds do and how boats move in those specific waters under those specific conditions. And 4 miles in 8 to 10 hours does not match what Ken knows about how the Sea of Abaco works, even in rough conditions, even drifting, even without an engine. Captain Bill, the licensed boat captain who was anchored directly beside the soulmate that night with friends and whose account has been confirmed through multiple outlets, said the weather in that area really wasn't that bad. Not his characterization of the whole Bahamas. His characterization of the specific area where the soulmate was anchored. The specific waters. The specific night. From people who were there on anchor and experienced those conditions directly. Brian described 3-foot seas, 18 to 22 knot winds, darkness so complete he could not see his wife. Ken says 4 miles should not take 8 to 10 hours. Jim Todd says at 6:38 p.m. there was total daylight for another 45 minutes. Captain Bill's friends say the conditions weren't that bad. 3 people, 3 different positions in relation to that evening. 3 separate observations that each individually could be explained or qualified. But together they point toward the same gap in the arithmetic. And in the middle of all of it is a green cover-up that search and rescue never knew about. And a timestamp on a photograph that says 6:34 p.m. And a surveillance record that says 6:38 p.m. And a police statement that says 7:30 p.m. Jim Todd asked Brian to be specific about where Lynette went overboard. Brian could not be. He said it was confusing. He couldn't be sure. Jim pointed to 3 different spots on the nearby shoreline, each one visible from the bow of the rescue boat. And Brian's response was that he just couldn't say. It was confusing. Jim has said in his interview that he initially assumed the confusion was intoxication. A man who had been through a traumatic night, who had been drinking, who was exhausted and disoriented. That assumption felt reasonable at the time. Then Jim learned that Brian had approximately 2 drinks over 2.5 hours. And Ken confirmed that the bartender's own assessment of Brian's state when he left the Abaco Inn was sober, not noticeably impaired, functional. Jim Todd said something directly when that fact changed his understanding. He said that absent intoxication and absent panic, what a person in a boat does when their partner goes overboard in shallow water in daylight is instinctive and automatic. You throw the anchor, it is at your feet, it is large, it is unavoidable. You throw it and you hold your position and you do not drift away from the person who has just gone into the water. The anchor was never deployed. Jim also said something about the second life jacket that has not received the attention it deserves. There were 2 life jackets in the dinghy. Brian says he threw the green float. But there was a second life jacket there. You could pick it up and throw it like a discus and get more distance. Or better, you put one on, grab the other, and you go over the side. You are 150 yards from shore. You are a former United States Marine. You swim to her. You pull her to shore. You both get out of the water. You find the dinghy in the morning. None of that happened. Brian Hooker denies any wrongdoing. He said to NBC News he never harmed Lynette and never would harm Lynette. His attorney has put that denial on the record in the clearest possible terms. He has not been charged with any crime. But 4 miles did not take 8 to 10 hours to a man from the Bahamas who knows those waters. And a green cover-up that was visible in a photograph taken at 6:34 p.m. never appeared in any description Brian gave to the people searching the water for his wife. And 150 yards from shore, in what the photograph and the surveillance footage suggest was still full daylight. A second life jacket sat in the bottom of that dinghy and never entered the water. Ken did not see any of that. Ken was behind his bar. Ken saw Brian Hooker twice and heard him say thank you for the fast service and watched him go back to the pool. But Ken's math does not work, and Jim Todd's green cover-up does not work, and the 634 photograph does not work alongside the 730 statement to police. And when three things that should be simple do not resolve the way simple things should, the question they produce is not complicated. What happened on the water between 6:38 p.m. and 4 a.m.? The investigation is active. The U.S. Coast Guard criminal investigation remains open. The devices seized from the Soulmate are being analyzed. The Apple Watch data that was confirmed by a U.S. Coast Guard officer in a direct phone call to Lynette's mother is being read. The Royal Bahamas Police Force Commissioner has confirmed to NBC News that Brian Hooker remains a named suspect who has not been cleared and can be rearrested. Carly Aylesworth flew to the Bahamas to search for her mother. She walked the shorelines where the cadaver dogs were working. She gave a formal statement to police. She sat on the dock and looked at the boat and said out loud, to nobody who could hear her, "Hey, Mom, I'm here, wherever you are." Darlene Hamlet is 76 years old and waiting in Florida for a phone call that has not come. She told Ashley Banfield, "I just want nothing more than I love you and wish you would have come home." Lynette Hooker called the ocean her happy place. She documented a decade of that love on a social media page called The Sailing Hookers, sea turtles and sunsets and cinnamon rolls and the particular radiance of someone who has found exactly where they belong. She was 55 years old and fit and strong, and she had been swimming since she was a child. On the evening of April 4th, 2026, Ken the bartender poured her husband his last round and heard thank you for the fast service. And 4 minutes after a stranger took a photograph of Lynette in her green cover-up at 6:34 p.m., the surveillance camera at the Abaco Inn recorded them walking toward the dock. And Brian Hooker told police they left at 7:30. 4 miles should not take 8 to 10 hours. Ken knows those waters. And the green cover-up never made it into a single description to a single member of the team that searched for Lynette in those same waters through the night. She deserves every question asked with honesty. She deserves the full weight of every documented detail followed completely to its conclusion. She deserves the truth of what happened on that water on the night of April 4th, 2026. The investigation continues. The analysis continues. The search continues. If you have any information about the disappearance of Lynette Hooker, contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force or the U.S. Coast Guard. Both investigations remain active. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. His attorney states he categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing. All individuals referenced are presumed innocent unless formally charged and convicted in a court of law. This is Global Crime Files. Every victim deserves the truth. Every story deserves to be told.